Thanks for coming to Detour Ahead. We have two speakers, Sophie Hutfield and Dylan Aikens. Some of you will know Dylan, he's been in working on Bamboo is the New Plastic 2 years ago. And also there was the Bee Radio project. And I'll pass you over to them.
Hello, just wanted to check audio, and thank you, Rob, for inviting myself to get this great opportunity to come and use an hour of your time and ours to hopefully get somewhere. And we've got Sophie Hutfield, who's a visual practitioner, visual artist, and works a bit in education, who's also I'm going to hand over halfway through. So if I sort of 20 minutes, 25 minutes time, I start, because kind of shut me up. We've got little things to get through, right? So today, we're going to discuss how social art practice can inform societal change. Right, so that's us, people, who we live, where we're going. And the question is, can participatory art practice improve our world? So, considering public space and how we use it, and we've got a very pixelated slide here from an artist called, I'm going to show two artists that sort of inform my practice and help me. When I was studying, we looked at these people to try and figure out what we're going to do later on in careers and stuff. So Thomas Herschel, kind of Swiss guy, and he's an installation artist. And this is called Crystal of Resistance from 2011, and he's entitled it Mixed Media Installation View at the Swiss Pavilion in the 54th Venice Biennale. So it's out in Venice, which is a big thing where lots of people come together every 2 years. And he made this. Right? And he's kind of best known for his sculpture constructions produced from disposable mass manufactured goods. And he gathers together references and imagery culled from popular media. And he's also quite interested in some theorists that you may or may not have heard of, depending if you're kind of interested in reading. And, like Gilles Deleuze and Georges Bataille, right, who are kind of philosophers, which I'm not an academic, right? I've read about 3 philosophy books, and I kind of dip into it, kind of help to do what I make, right? It's not I'm not kind of a big reader, and I have a short attention span, but I try and read, right? So Herschel was born in 1957 in Bern. And what do we know about him? He studied design in Zurich, right? He now lives and works in Paris, but he gets around, he's quite on the map now, and he dips out. So with this thing, he's widely regarded as a leading artist of his generation, and he uses plastic sheeting, cardboard, aluminium, packing tape, magazine images to create a dystopian reality. And becomes a metaphor for the individual and the collective struggle to establish democracy. Implicated in Herschel's work, viewers are obliged to consume and reflect upon that which they may have hitherto been able to ignore in their daily lives. The disparity between the viewer and the bombardment of blown-up imagery reminds us of how distant and removed we can feel when confronted with imagery. So he kind of uses bits of old, like things that he's found, an old tape, and sort of anything he can get. It's kind of not like high art. It's not, sort of bronze or polished or the objectives. So in the pavilion, he first of all found 4 artists. So he started off making work. He found 4 artists he liked, right? And there was sort of Mondrian and a few other, and he made these kind of altars, stations, in galleries and public spaces, right? And then he went on to make, he sort of got the next size up. He's kind of scaled up his act. And he went on to make monuments for other philosophers he liked. So Spinoza, Gilles Deleuze-Bataille, and Gramsci. And he went into a community in New York and kind of fished out. He walks around like the city and finds people, finds out what they want. And he believes like the artist should be a kind of consultant to the communities he's working in. So he's not kind of prescribing stuff, he's just kind of like working with them. All right? So, and he's trying to sort of fix a position to contact reality and to use art to be a tool and to use art to be about the time we live in. And the problem for an artist is what we do and how to do it. So the problem for an artist is what to do and how we do it. And to use art as a tool to fix a position. And can this position create a form? And can this form be a universal form? I find that quite hard to get to grips with, is this truth or a universal autonomy, and can public art be opposed? And so art in public space belongs to everyone by its nature, right? So we've got something called the public sphere, and the public as the eventual receiver of all art. So the term public space for a place to present sculpture where you put work and asking the question, what is public space, right? So, and he answers the question, Herschel. He's thinking all space that is not dedicated to art. So he's kind of saying that can a public space, like a railway station or a public plaza, that's a public space. But a sculpture garden is not public space. That's dedicated to art. Okay, so art galleries and those spaces are sort of delineated and away from the public sphere. Right? So his locations kind of city neighbourhoods, sort of between houses, and in the democracy of refunctioning a public space into what could be an art space. So in a gallery, he's kind of done the opposite, where he's kind of refunctioned an art gallery into a public space. So that's kind of got Herschel through horse. And I was going to look at my work, which is, I kind of worked as a kind of art technician when I left college, I had to get a job so I could survive. So I worked for 3 days a week doing art technician work in an art gallery, in an auction house in West End. And I made plinths and boxes and the pedestals, and I helped move the art, and I kind of got, and I was hopeless at carpentry up until that point, but I kind of had to learn, and I learned how to put stuff together. So I started making chairs out of old pallet wood and scraps that all reclaimed timber, and it's kind of, the joinery's a bit rubbish, but I kind of looked at where I could, sort of carpentry books and kind of got the skills, right? And copied stuff, and it just about worked as a chair. But I also made these kind of bits and pieces. And then I got a bit better and started producing these kind of vitrines for a local history group. So, and got helped with an architect's designer group, and that was like a local library and a sort of small museum collection. You had to work with the museum and kind of make sure all the stuff was all supported and kind of weird bits of historical artifacts that had their own narrative. So then I got even better at carpentry because I'd been doing it for 2 years trying to. So the University of Essex were some migrants from Syria had to come to London, had to come to Essex because they couldn't live in Syria anymore because it was very difficult for obvious reasons. And so they kind of got an art project together where we worked with some local communities and a curator, and this is a campus where it's sort of like and I had to make these stars, and the new people to Essex had to write on the boxes and about what they're, to try and feel welcome, you know. So, we got, okay, so there's something called the Grey Organisation, right? And they were a group that existed in London in the 80s, right? And they sort of all had it was a kind of weird group. They all squatted a flat in Hackney, and they kind of dressed the same, and they kind of got haircuts the same, and all worked together and collaborated, right? And they were kind of interested in making art. And so, and they were kind of outsiders to the art world. You know, they weren't part of this elite, you know, posh people in West London and their yachts. They were not part of that. They were sort of from Pimlico, from council estates, and they were kind of really good at graphic design. They were really good at that. And they kind of worked together, painting and, you know, making sculptures, performing, making videos. And they got so good that De La Salle, this legendary, and they also, they got a job making videos for even the Rolling Stones in 4 years, asked them to do this kind of trend. They wanted young people with new ideas to sort of rebrand these old hippie bands that would, so put them in contemporary context to it was really from their record companies would get them to do it. So they did these things. So later on, some of the people sort of disbanded, and they decided, one of them used to live just down the road from this project that we got. They managed to get the council to give them some money to build this structure. So my friend who I went to art school with, he needed a carpenter. He knew I could make chairs and stuff. So we had to build this thing. And it was a replica of the last standing structure in Calais, in the jungle, which was sort of migrational theme and there it is completed, and we got local poets and artists to sort of decorate, and they could go in. It was like an open art school, which is sort of in this square in West London, which is Notting Hill Housing Trust. There's lots of different people live there, and they do poetry and things like that. And this is up for 2 weeks. So, and then, okay, so I'm trying to find, the slide's a bit of a sinky order here, but. So we made another pavilion. This time we got so brilliantly sponsored by this Spanish box company that they gave us all these boxes for nothing so they could promote their product. So we had to kind of rope them in, and we made this box and we painted all these crazy designs on it. And then the next year they liked it so much that they made this bamboo pavilion. So, and then we had to learn how to do, I mean, I'm hopeless at sewing, but somehow we managed to cobble together this thing, and hopefully, you know, and there was like art events going on in it. So we had painters turning up, people doing poetry and performing, and steel pan bands, and lots of different people came and did their thing there in the square. And there's another. Right, so the next job. So we didn't have a pavilion for a while. So the slides are completely hopelessly ordered, and that's my. So one project I did here was a radio show called Bees in the City. So somehow we went out and we found a director of television from Doctor Who, and we recorded, and here's our colleague Rob helping out, and we took photographs of, we'd never worked with beekeepers before, don't know anything about them, but we had to kind of understand everything we could about climate change and how bees are reflecting, insects are helping us. I'm not an ecologist, but I think that I've learned a bit about it now, and we produced a half-hour radio show that was shown on a community radio station called Portobello Radio. So that was the outcome. And we all gathered together here and filmed Bill Anderson, who's the director of a Doctor Who, one or two like TV shows, but he's also a beekeeper. So he makes beehives. So that was one outcome of a sort of community practice that we were able to do last year. And that was because the lockdown and the restrictions meant we couldn't make an enclosed space. So we had to kind of work out how to do something. So this was kind of the work I made before as a sculptor. And this is kind of how the Bamboo Pavilion progressed. So we kind of up-teched it, and we made some more sort of technical design engineered components for this kind of radical architectural system. And I managed to get myself in a group show with Frank Bowling, who's an amazing, brilliant guy, and someone called Simon Hiscock, who's a brilliant painter who works with Frank a bit. So I was kind of somehow shoved back in public art became a fine art public space, blurring those divisions. And this was a small commission for a community. Like I'm quite interested in abandoning nuclear weapons for the universe. So I had to make this thing for the 50th anniversary of CND, right? But what I had to learn how to do there was this sort of decorative paint finish, so it looked like Stonehenge, which it kind of not. And everyone from the CND movement, this popped up in various cities around the UK, so it got a tour, right? And people had picnics in Bristol and Lancashire, and it kind of created solidarity for a political movement. Finally, there's one more project I'd like to expand on. So, in the park, in a park in Camberwell, a few artists and stuff did like a dog show, a kind of non-elitist dog show. And they managed to get all these dog owners, the community of dog owners, came together, and we managed to hustle a gazebo, and the local park somehow got involved. And my job was to make these statues for the prizes, like trophies for the dog show. And we got this kind of celebrity actor, and she's a fashion designer who I met on the bus. And we lined up all the statues, and we got a table and a gazebo, and they presented. He's on a vampire show or something that's quite well known, and he's like kind of in the. So somebody made these posters. It's brilliant. It's like, so there's like a dog show, and these are the different categories, like dog that looks most like its owner, best dressed dog, cutest puppy, and they weren't like high crufts where you get this sort of breeding of like the best tail or something like that. It was just like the most disobedient dog. So it was a kind of celebration of kind of anomalies and hopelessness, really, and sort of brilliance, and people really loved it. And really got on board, and I couldn't believe it was. I thought it was going to be a sort of rain out, washout day, but. So that's the last one. So I've given you like one example of, that's like the dog show as an example of how public art can create groups of people, bring them together, how building and construction can kind of pull people together in a kind of communities and participatory art. And I'd like to wrap this up, and I've sort of lifted this from Artificial Hells from Claire Bishop, which is the outro of this, which is a book about participatory arts, which is, and she discusses that can participatory arts tread the fine line of a dual horizon, face towards the social field, but also towards art itself, addressing both its immediate participants and subsequent audiences. So I can't really get my head around that, but I think it means like we've both got, we get something from each other in conclusion. Thank you. So Sophie was going to hopefully put something together on her practice and I'll hand over, and then we can, I've got a couple of questions and then see how we're doing.
Take this off. Can you hear me? Okay, put that in there. Hi, thanks. That was great. There was lots of great words, actually. Consultant. I really liked the consultant to the community. I thought it was quite interesting. So, hi, I'm Sophie. And I guess, yeah, my practice is multidisciplinary, and it always involves people, whether that's in an obvious way or in a more overt way. So I'm just going to talk through some of my work, but firstly, I guess social art practice, participatory art practice, it's quite a slippery term. And I guess for me, my social practice, I do lots of different projects. A lot of them I do at the same time, so it's not like I'm moving from one thing to the other. And I use lots of different methods of how I make work. So a lot of the time it's about the idea and then the medium that I use to communicate that. And I actually have a making background as well, and I think a lot of that is has meant that I've become more of a social art practice. But I would actually argue that all art is social art because it always involves people in some respect. And a lot of social art practice stems from education and pedagogy, so like a lot of like the study of education. A lot of that has existed within the realms of that hasn't traditionally been accepted by the art market, because what I do isn't really about making a product to sell or even to show in a gallery. It's not really what my interest is, and that's not really how artists make money, to be honest, or make a living. So I did a model making degree in Bournemouth many years ago, and then I retrained as an engineer, and I worked in an engineering workshop for years. So everything, when you make things, it's always collaborative. You're never one person making one thing. And I think that's how I've sort of carried over in my work and the way I work. And I care about social justice issues, politics, and all of social art tends to stem from a lot of those ideas and practices. Can it change things? I don't know. I feel like it's always about thinking what is collaborative and what is community, and communities can change things. And artists is just another language for how to communicate with people. And I think it's always about working with and never for, and understanding your role in that. So for me, it's always me questioning why. Why should I be the one to do this? And then if the answer is I shouldn't be the one to do this, then I won't do it. Okay, so I'll talk about this project in a bit, but I think it sums up kind of me. So a lot of my work I'm going to talk through today, all the way up the process how I make it often involves like workshops with groups of people, interview, I do lots of interviews, and I also collaborate across a lot of different disciplines, particularly with academics and research. And that goes on to inform the making of physical artworks, and some of them might sit in a gallery, but I don't tend to make things for a gallery. And some of them just exist within that space where you're working with people, and that's the only time it exists, and then you leave and it doesn't exist anymore. So this is a work called Break the Frame. So I did a master's, so I worked in engineering for a few years, decided I wanted to carry on my education, and I got a scholarship to go to Central St. Martin's. And I did a course, again, I did a design course. So I would say I'm an artist, but all my education has been predominantly in design or making. And this course was a cross-disciplinary course called Material Futures, and a lot of it was around the future, sustainability. So we had to do about something, all our work had to relate back to the UN sustainability goals. And mine was about work. And a lot of my practice is about work, it's about social class, it's about making and making cultures and the history of making. And a lot of making is connected to unions. And this project was in response, my dad was made redundant in 2019, and a lot of it was to do with actually the language, the rhetoric around redundancy, the kind of injustice of that you'd just be let go after 40 years of a job. And then I was looking a lot at the history of the Luddites. Does anyone know who the Luddites are? Yes, we've got our hands up there. So for those of you that don't know, if you're called a Luddite today, it means you're anti-technology. But actually, that word has been co-opted, and the Luddites were actually a group of workers that collectivized because their managers brought in machines which basically displaced them from their jobs. And this was during a time that if you lost your job, you'd starve. There wasn't a kind of a social net. There wasn't like a benefit system or anything. And their response was to smash the machines. And a lot of and from that action now, we see it as anti-technology and that they're resisting progress. But they weren't resisting progress, they were resisting, losing their livelihoods and their jobs. And I made this during a lockdown as well, so a lot of it built on my bed. I worked with a musician to create a sound score, because I was looking a lot at post-industrialism and its relationship to music. And a lot of musical movements have come from Fordism, from the factory, and there's a really strong, tangible relationship there. And I made it with my dad with the intention that he would show it to his friends in the pub, and it was never made for a gallery necessarily. And I had to change it. So this is a CNC machine that I built. So I got it secondhand, quite cheap. And then I don't know if any of you have ever used a laser cutter before, but it was that machine. And I just co-opted the movement of the machine. And then I hand carved these puppets just with wood, any wood that I could find. And I had to whittle them on my bed. And then, so the puppets are kind of controlled by the machine. So they're not making anything, they're making movements and they're making a performance. And a lot of the time when you work in these sorts of spaces, you're performing an action as well as making a product. So I can show a little bit of it. It's about 10 minutes altogether. I don't know if I can play, is there a play? Oh. It might not have carried over I think it might be it might be something else, but I think there's a few videos on there, and I don't think they've transferred over. Is it on the PDF? Oh, did we pull that? Yeah, it doesn't matter then, we'll skip it. But a lot of what I do is actually making videos, but we're not going to be able to see any today, so. Can you go online with this? Yeah, I'll just show a really quick clip, just so then so I'm not talking. So yeah, a lot of what I'm doing currently is making moving image, but all of it involves kind of social issues and working with people. So yeah, the final product you see is not necessarily connected to some of the processes that I've gone through to make it, which involves people. Can I? Thanks. That's fine. Okay. So I've just got, oh God, I'm not used to Macs. Okay. there we go. I'll just show a really, really quick clip.
G03. Dwell on a repetitive story. This historical dwell will last on one spindle rotation. Ned Ludd broke a frame. The hammer blow sparks a new narrative.
Oh,
Definition of a Luddite.
sorry. Oh, you can't see. I
A
don't know what I've
person
done there.
opposed to new technology.
I don't know how this works. How do I stop it from being frozen?
Oh, I think you just jump back to the PowerPoint, didn't you?
Sorry, everybody. Technology. Maybe I am anti-technology. I think it's on. I think that, I don't know if they saw any of
G03. Dwell on a repetitive story. This historical dwell will last on one spindle rotation. Ned Ludd broke a frame. The hammer blow sparks a new narrative. Definition of a Luddite.
There we go.
1. A person opposed to new technology or ways of working. For example, a small-minded Luddite resisting progress. 2. A member of any of the bands of English workers who destroyed machinery they believed threatened their jobs. Certain myths and metaphors stick. Luddite. The revolutionary plotters of the past. Rebels against the future. A future assigned to them by a new political economy. That those who control capital can do anything they wish. This story stains. The fiction remains. A hammer reverberates, and the frame smashes, splintering across time. Luddite and progress don't mix. They tell us, progress moves along nostalgic tool paths.
Okay. Maybe we'll go on. I think I was going to show another video after this, and then we can go back. So,
It's just the corners, basically.
okay.
So, that one?
Yeah. So it's just. I'll play it in a second. So, I mean, I've just shown a part of that, but at the end, actually, the voice changes, and it's me and my dad speaking in union. And a lot of it's the kind of resolution of that particular narrative is that looking at care and care practices and like a safety net and what that means when you're working and the kind of, I find video a really like interesting medium to work in because it kind of brings all these really complicated ideas and you can bring them together for a really short period and then they can kind of go back to their disciplines where they belong. And I think social art, all of social art is about kind of co-opting all these other different disciplines and then you're working with them in a different way. And so I've got another video here. I don't know if there's really time to show it, but and this is just sort of follows on from that. And this was a project where I worked with an engineer and I worked with specifically open source communities. So people that work with technology in a collaborative way. So they're not necessarily working with private companies, but a lot of it's like hacking. And I worked with them. It was there was an engineer called George who I worked with at UCL, and he was creating new machines for surgeons to automate certain processes, so to make them more efficient, to make patients safer. And all the machinery he was using was firstly it was open source, and secondly it was machinery that's used in factories and factory line production. And it just, for me, really summarized how technology is used. So a lot of my practice is around how these tools are implemented. And, you know, in the case of like middle class workers, technology is used to upskill. But then in cases where you deem low skilled, it's about de-skilling. And then it's about losing your job and your livelihood. And you kind of see that across all sectors. You see it in the care sector, you see it kind of in traditional manufacturing, and a lot of it, it's, you know, again, it's just that same story repeating itself. And I wanted to make something that looked at the history of surgery, which is a craft and was a working class profession at the time when it first started. People didn't want to work with surgeons, and And it kind of goes into the history of that, but then looks at the idea of a cut as well, like a cut. So a lot of it's the history of cutting. So what George is doing was automating a new cutting technique, but also a cut is an economic term, and sort of contrasting these two ideas. I press play. I probably won't watch all of it, but.
The act of cutting is
I'll turn it up a bit.
Cutting is one of the oldest cultural practices. It is a fundamental way for human beings to enter into correspondence with materials. Penetration of the inner sanctum or the previously forbidden body practice. In the domain of medicine, surgeons cut the body to
There is
understand
surgery.
the
This is
materials.
a
Enclosures that must be cut to reveal their secrets. The body being cut is a node of exchange. Selecting this operation as a starting point opens up new perspectives. Surgeons were often catering to the lower classes, while physicians resided in courts and castles. Surgery was left to menial barbers. They were on hand to cut, or rather, an edit between two kinds. A surgical instrument is a specifically designed tool or device for performing specific actions. The surgeon uses a common tool and adapts it for use. Some ancient sources of tools are weapons, butcher's tools, carpenter's tools, leatherworker tools, and metalworking implements. This process still continues, coming out of military, automobile shops, aerospace, workplaces, and kitchens. Surgery shifting from craft to profession. There was a period of standardization, and finally, surgical robots, operated manually by surgeons, puppet-like, that feels and acts like the hands of a surgeon. Precision and uncertainty in the preparation and execution of the cut on different scales. The gifted worker, the surgeon, may perhaps benefit, but the average worker cannot escape automation. A cut is also an economic term. It refers to a reduction, eliminating the superfluous parts. Personalized cuts, slice through. Efficiencies borne by the workers' bodies. Productivity squeeze, reorganize labor processes to dismember and re-articulate a body. Economic efficiency. There's no such thing as immutable. Robots are more productive than wage laborers. They raise none of the concerns about
I'll stop it there just because of time. How do I get back onto the slides? Thanks. Probably could have watched more, but. So yeah, they're just like examples of kind of, but also that where you don't always see maybe the social elements that have happened with people, but and a lot of that is just like I'm a crafts person. I would like to make things, and I don't always want to stick to the medium that I've been trained in. But also, like this is an example. I have a performance practice as well. So, and a lot of it's to do with workers' rights, and that's where it's a lot of it involves theatre, and I commonly work a lot with academics and then workers within mainly educational settings, and a lot of that involves the role of care and actually kind of trying to claim care back from a lot of institutions. If you've heard of the mindfulness movement and wellness, a lot of institutions often use that as an excuse to kind of not pay workers fairly, or give you the material conditions that you need as a worker. And a lot of the mindfulness movement has been co-opted by a lot of big organisations as a way of kind of cost-cutting, but also putting the ownership of your mental health back onto you, and it's your problem that you're stressed. And not to say that I have any problem with like wellness or like self-care practices. I think they're really important, but I think when they're used as the only solution to a really big problem, it means that we're in a mental health crisis at the moment, and I think a lot of that is to do with material conditions. So I often collaborate with people, so this is a performance I do with Sophie Bullock, who's also an artist and a social art practitioner, And we do a stand-up comedy routine where we're a fake mindfulness business called Ambience Factory. And we kind of go up and give all the vacuous sort of language that is used, and we sort of really play with it and push it to the edge. And a lot of the time people think we're serious, and then it just gets more and more ridiculous, and they begin to realize actually we're joking and this is a joke. Like the situation that we're all in is just ridiculous. And then afterwards we always do a session where we work with people and actually really like talk about care in a more serious, less playful way. So there's always kind of us, we always are considering our audience, and we're never punching down, we're punching up and trying to, you know, where are the problems stemming from? And a lot of them are systemic. And I think a lot of the time it's about a lot of our problems and the solutions to our problems about how we need to sort of deal with it from an individual level, which is, I think, wrong. And we work a lot with a graphic designer, and he works called Keith Dodds, and he does lots of work for Verso Books and Greenpeace, and he sort of created an identity for us. So yeah, it's quite collaborative how we work. And so yeah, this is some more examples of some of the stuff we did in lockdown. We did lots of seminars, but we were kind of playing with kind of the government rhetoric and the acronyms they use. So we came up with an acronym. We pretended that we were employed by the government to sort of ease the transition of Brexit and COVID. And so we came up with We Care, which is we endorse cutting all resources efficiently, and sort of, which, you know, we did this at the start of the pandemic, and a lot of what they've kind of, we expected they have ended up doing. I might skip this one just because of time. This was again another project with data. I'm aware we're running out of time, so I don't, maybe it's all good, okay. So this is a project I did. Again, I collaborate with another artist called Sophie Hutfield, and we were looking at data and healthcare, again, looking specifically at technology's role in the future of healthcare. And we have a lot of apps, and there was an app called Babylon, which was a paid-for service where you would pay for a GP via an app as opposed to going to your local GP. And it was one of the first apps where a GP diagnosed someone online. And a lot of it's just looking at the future of that and what that means. And obviously, we sort of imagine the body as a site to mine, and a lot of our data, we don't know where it goes, it's very intangible. And this was about making data more tangible. So we worked with groups of people at but specifically at UAL, which is where London College of Fashion is based, and asked people to imagine the future of healthcare. So we did lots of workshops where we looked at research into data and like the future clinic. And a lot of people's responses were quite dystopian, to be honest. But so we ended up creating these objects, which we collected all our own data. So we had sweat, heartbeat, stepometer, because a lot of our data, I haven't got a smartwatch or anything like that, but on your phone, that's how your data can be collected now, and a lot of apps use this data. And we put them into this software, and it created these really like beautiful jewel-like shapes. So we 3D printed them and sprayed them and made them look really luxurious and nice, and we just imagined them as these like mined rocks. And we were looking a lot at like comparing, so there was a phrase called data is the new oil. And we're just sort of, we actually kind of made this metaphor literal, where we're like, oh, okay, well, is the body a site of extraction? And if you compare mining, extractive processes, and then they're good. And also data is quite a physical thing as well. It has a physical environmental impact. And so we just imagine this luxurious kind of, we were looking a lot at showroom design, and we created this network. So it's based on a neural network, which a lot of algorithmic design is based on. And these were all just our different kinds of data, and we just wanted to make something that, imagine that these were what are being, you know, we're being commodified, our bodies, and this is our data, and we don't access any of that kind of money or revenue. And then we etched these prints, which were CT scans of the body. So we're trying to, it was also a video, so there's lots of different work involved, but I'll carry on. So this is it's a bit blurry. This is a project I did last year, and this was based in Wednesbury, so I'm from that area, and I worked with an organisation where it was a project that was specifically meant to be completely online, and I kind of basically did research in connection to the area. Most people don't have access to broadband connection. About 20% of people did, and they wanted to do a community-focused project online. So I decided that, and I was looking at the history of the town. So the project, it was specifically looking at the history of manufacturing in Wednesbury. And I proposed that I wanted to look at women's roles in industry. I don't know why it's not working. So I was looking specifically at women, and you know, women have always been on the factory floor, but they're also, you know, part of cultivating a lot of regional towns and regional sort of working centres. And so I was looking more at their role, like, you know, a lot of the shops that existed. Obviously, childcare was a big part of it, but also the CAFs. A lot of women like served the local workforce and contributed to the culture, and also like, you know, maintaining workers for labour. So I went through a lot of archives and online, and I interviewed loads of people, and I did it all on the phone because it was during COVID, and created this publication which sort of collected a lot of images that were shared with me, and it was just different women in the area that were connected to the manufacturing sector, which no longer really exists in the area, as a lot of these towns kind of have suffered from that, and then to people today who live and work there, and sort of celebrating that. And then I created this zine and went to lots of the spaces where I interviewed. So this was a shop called Maggie's Shop. They were just in there and available for free. So it was online, and it was also just available to take away, just to open. A lot of when I'm doing projects with groups, I always think about, I think you talked about the exchange. Like, you know, is it, I think you need to be careful that you're not just taking from people, because that's not what social art's about. It's not about flying in somewhere, getting what you need and then leaving, and then that's quite a violent act to a group of people, I think. So a lot of it, and I'm still in connection with a lot of the people that I've spoken to, and you know, I'm aware that I'm being paid for this, and other people aren't being paid to do this. And so what can I give in exchange? So a lot of the work I do now, if I ever do workshops, I insist that people that are in the workshop get paid as well. So I'm always kind of, you need to consider people that are giving your time to, I think is really important. Like, you've got an ethical responsibility, I think. So this is one of the workshops that I ran, so I thought I'd go more into like actually the process. And social art is mainly process-based, and what you see is the process, but not necessarily end results. Sometimes it ends in artwork, sometimes it doesn't. It's not really the point of it. It's about making connections, and the work is the social aspect. So I do lots of actually workshops on ethics, specifically design ethics, because design is fucked up and has fucked over the world, basically, is my opinion, probably why I'm not in design. And a lot of it, there's no ethics charter or anything in as a designer. So I worked with lots of different groups, like in education, but also outside, where we're sort of looking at actually what should design be doing and how can you practice those things. And it always involves making and hands-on processes, but also like thinking and writing, and yeah. And so this is kind of one of so I ran this workshop, and this is what we came up with at the end, was our ethics charter. Ambience factory, like I said, so I do lots of, this was just like, we asked academics to think of a technology, if they could do anything, like they had to come up with some sort of technology to sort of fix a problem or to make them feel better. And one of the academics was like, I want a Hoover that sucks up numbers because I'm so sick of the bureaucracy and the metrics of the university. And then another worker at the university said, I want a bath that I could fly away in. And so we just had them like model these things and just like manifest them. And so yeah, lots of this is, and then I did some work for the Craft Council. So yeah, a lot of it is about making and process. And a lot of schools today don't have very good art provision. Art education's just been stripped from a lot of schools. And so I worked with a series of schools in the Midlands with the Craft Council and designed a pewter casting workshop, but with really accessible materials. So that's kinetic sand, which I don't know if you've used it before, but it's just a sand that you can buy and you can press into it and then pour pewter. And you can. So we were looking a lot at Maker's Mark, the history of Maker's Marks. And there I am, and then doing some casting. So a lot of it is like, it's always around people, and you don't necessarily always see that, and that's a big part of the practice. So this was a big project that I've done. It's part of the British Art Show 9 School Commission, And so I'm really interested in storytelling, if you haven't seen some of my work. And I wanted students to look at the phrase, many hands make light work, which is all about what I'm about, which is collaboration, community, who tells the stories, and why is there just one dominant narrative. And so I worked with 5 different schools, and we were looking at Midlands histories. So there's the Wolverhampton Sikh bus driver strike. There was Malcolm X, who visited Smethwick. It's the only time he ever visited the UK. Cradley Heath women's strike. There was lots of history in this area, which led to a lot of like rights for people on different issues. And so I invited students to look at these, but also to like look at issues today and contemporary issues, which, you know, it's all about, you know, how can we recontextualize it today. And they each had to, so each school had a word. So one school had many hands make light work, and then we each made a film based on a story that they wrote, and they could decide kind of, you know, what was the content of that story, and reinterpret each word. And then, so it's an individual work in its own right, but also a collective work as well. And a lot of it was collaboration and collaborative work. And in a lot of schools, students don't actually collaborate together, especially with COVID. And so this was a still of one of those, of us filming it, and I worked with local musicians to score that as well. And this was about the climate crisis. So each one was about lots of climate crisis, care work, insecurity, and these are all topics that students that had kind of decided that they wanted to talk about. There is some videos, but don't know, probably don't work. I don't know whether it's worth showing, but there's probably not time anyway. But yeah, it's available to see. It's like a 16-minute work. And I thought, just before I go, so our connection is through Mark Essen, who set up, this is just an example, I think, of good social art practice. It's modern clay. And modern clay was set up in Birmingham, and it's a ceramic studio. And I have a connection to it. I did an artist residency there when it first started in 2017. And Mark got some Arts Council funding, and he set up a ceramic space. And it was specifically for artists, not necessarily, you know, hardcore potters, and the local community as well. And it's now a co-op, so that means kind of it's collectively owned. People know what a co-op is, and these are the co-op members. I'm an associate member because I don't live in the Midlands anymore. And basically, he offers that service. So if you're an artist and you want to have a practice, you can practice together, but also they work collectively. They do lots of workshops with the community. So with Crisis, which is a homeless charity in Birmingham, I think nationally as well. And he works, well, they all collectively work now, so it's not necessarily one person owns it anymore, to kind of create work with the community and be invested in the community. And because they're all co-op members, they're all equally invested in that and its development, and take on kind of a non-hierarchical space. And I think it's just a good example of artists using the co-op model and using collective models to practice together, because it's really hard to be an artist. And, you know, you don't necessarily are going to have a gallery pick you up. And even then, you don't make a living from that, unfortunately. So I think having a collective approach and collaborative approach is always it's always going to make you stronger as a practitioner, and kind of as to have a career, if you want to call it that, to have a career in it as well. And I guess, yeah, I'll finish there. But yeah, thanks everybody.
Okay, that's good stuff. I think we're in danger of overrunning, but that was phenomenal, and showed a great load of examples of how, considering public space and how we can use it successfully, and how difficult it is. And it is a struggle, but you can do it. So we're thinking about public ideas, public spaces in terms of their access and their use and ownership, creating a more equal and just society. And I think that's crucial as our role as artists.
Yeah, I agree.
We can open up, a lot of the questions were were answered that I was going to ask Sophie. So if you've got any questions, we can, if anyone's intrigued or wants to unpick any of that stuff.
Here you go, Sarah. Here you go. There's a microphone.
Oh my gosh.
Is this me? Oh, yes. Oh, my Lord. I wanted to ask you about the University of Essex piece with the Syrian migrants, the stars, the 5 stars.
Yeah.
And did you make that out of wood?
Yeah, it's just NDF. And we had to get the biggest piece we could find. And I think we got about 3 sheets of MDF. And then I went online and worked out how to draw a star using a compass and a ruler. And then it was a bit like the plywood you use here, but even cheaper. And then I just drew out a star shape. I did a couple of takes on paper, made a big compass, and you can draw a star. Anyone can draw a star.
And
and then we just enlarged it. And
the
then
3
painted them
colours,
the
they
colours.
were, is that from the Syrian flag, the 3 colours?
Yeah.
Red, white and green.
Yes.
And are the stars on the flag?
Yes. So a Syrian person that had only just arrived in the country could, and had a kind of not an easy backstory, to say the least. I think, it was an amazing thing to see that they could identify with that object and kind of write something in a language.
And size-wise, how tall was it?
Oh, they're like, it's kind of would reach that light in the 3 stacked together. I think we had to
Lovely.
use double-sized ply. So they had to stack together. So it was a monument.
And what year was that?
About 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
2016-ish.
Still there, in a sort of, it's quite a weird place. Pink Floyd played there in the 60s, and Essex has got a kind of radical left. They used to set fire to cars there in the 60s as a protest movement of radical art school culture. To sort of, there was a bit of that going on in the 60s in France. Somebody called Guy Debord, situationist critique that informed Banksy's work, and a whole load of other raft of underground artists that's more important and brilliant. So perhaps that ideology that art can kind of change society and reflect those things in even a sort of diluted way, making a monument. So there's a kind of ethic there of making radical art. Or art you couldn't sell might not have a value, it's not shiny and bronze or small. Galleries like small things that can 2D, they've got commodity. And Sophie was kind of saying it's difficult to make, if you don't want to make a commodity, where do you start?
Yeah.
By making a collective ceramic studio in some derelict street in Birmingham, which is now brilliant and going on.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, thank you very much.
Oh.
Was that a question? No. I think what you said about process, and I think that's something that I think we lose sight of within this sort of studio making, that we're so fixated with an end product, a thing, and that perhaps that is the market again. But what you said, Sophie, about the process and the journey, and I think in terms of the skills and the wisdom that I think there's heaps of within this institution, very broad range of life experiences and perspectives. And I just wanted to highlight that, because I think that's what's really special about both of your practices, is there's a sort of open-ended, there's an open-endedness, and it's about that kind of engagement and that journey through. So I just wondered if you could, when that, as a moment of understanding within your practices, when that struck you, when that happened.
That's a very hard question. Can you just kind of concise that down? Because I was...
Yeah, so when did you find yourself enjoying or engaging in the journey and not the outcome in
Yeah.
participative work?
I think that's just being a maker, I think, is that a lot of it is all process. So like you have your final product, but you actually I'll spend more time making a jig, for example, which will do a cut that lasts 10 seconds. I'll spend all day making that thing for that one moment. So I think a lot of what you do and a lot of the work you do is a labour, and that final thing almost is a bit irrelevant at the end of the day, because it's, the process, what you learn is like more, that's what you gain from that, if that makes sense. And like anything you gain from the thing is great. I don't know, I think it's just like, it's about learning, isn't it? And like remembering that I think once you get out of education, it is about what you're learning and it's not about an assignment or ticking a box, it's about actually, the process of what you're doing, and that's where that's the enjoyable bit, I think. I don't know if that makes sense, but...
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that links to the process of finding out how to draw a star in terms of using a ruler. I mean, that wasn't something I'd always used like a stencil or a template before. So to work out, to get that down, that was perhaps the voyage of discovery into this kind of unearthed territory and taking artistic risk and stepping forward and in that journey. That's kind of more important than kind of the polished sphere at the end of the masterpiece end game.
You're not saying that the final piece is redundant after you've done the labour?
No, but I think it's like, you're not finished. I don't think you're ever finished, if that makes sense. Like,
Okay.
every work I make is just another iteration of something, and and I think it's just like valuing it, because I think the end result, there's always so much emphasis is on that end product.
Yes.
And actually, like, most artists I know don't really, actually, it's mostly just testing. If you have a studio practice, a lot of it is just spending the day, like, pottering around testing things. And
So we could say that sometimes it's just about the journey.
yeah, and I think social art practice is probably, like, it has an aesthetic that I don't think a lot of gallery spaces like, because it's messy, it's complicated, and it's slippery. And also because it's not about trying to sell something. So I think it's like, but I don't think you should ever underestimate the power of aesthetics and the power of craft, because craft is very seductive and beautiful. And I would say we're both craftspeople, but I think it's also being aware that, like, there's a craft to that process as well. There's a craft to, like, the iteration and the learning, and that shouldn't be underestimated either.
Because I like the idea of the Bamboo Pavilion, but then you end up with a piece that's in a gallery with Frank Bowling. So how did you manage that, Dylan? You just applied to have your piece in that exhibition?
No, studio assistant is an abstract painter, and Frank's quite supportive of people around him, and he's never really been we've historically showed before with Frank as a group. Like, it was just there's a small group of artists in my community. We're painters, and we do small carpentry jobs. And we also, Frank, who's worked in education for a long time and is now kind of celebrated. He makes large-scale abstract paintings. So he supports his students as he supports them, we support him. It's kind of reciprocated. So having we have to kind of ask the council for the use of the old library, which is contentious in itself, and Frank was supportive of how a local collective solidarity with his sensibilities of solidarity with other artists. Why wouldn't they be? The only people that would be against that were the people commodifying, saying, "Oh, you're not playing in the major league." You know, the art world's terribly elitist, and those hierarchical pedagogy, like a nightmare, because you've got these kind of galleries that have got huge amounts of millions invested in this, like, commodification and trying to get the best price they can, and there's market, and it's all linked up to these auction houses. It's a terrible thing. It's like neoliberal nonsense. And at the end of the day, but we've got to kind of, on the other hand, there's a need for art in society, so we could understand, process these things like the horrendousness or brilliance, or celebrate our uniqueness and diversity, and get that all in. So Frank's all about that, and is very supportive even though his work is a thing that can be sold. And he's also a great painter as well. He's, really into materials, sort of fluidity and action painting and making things.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think a lot of where if you get an opportunity, a lot of it comes from your network and your friends, and it doesn't really come from those spaces. And I think it's very rare that those artists that make it actually they're also still struggling to make a living. So it's even when you make it, you don't really make it, if that makes sense, unless you have a lot of kind of backing or, yeah, I think for me it's less about competition and more about, collaboration and what is the best art world that you could want for yourself and your community, and how do you foster that, and that's where things like Modern Clay, but also things like your cohort, it all makes a difference in terms of, how you practice, I think. Personally, that's what I've found.
Thank you so much, Sophie, Dylan, and thank you, and for your questions.
And thank you as well. Thanks for coming in. That's good.